My mother-in-law called me while I was at work and said, "How fast can you get an EpiPen to your daughter? What's wrong with my girl?" I stepped out of the conference room already knowing something terrible had happened. Sydney's voice was shaking as she explained. Nomi's 5th grade class was on their nature walk field trip in Riverside Woods. She'd eaten something at lunch and was having a severe allergic reaction. The nearest ambulance was stuck behind a jackknifed semi that had closed Route 47. The backup routes would take them 45 minutes. The school's first aid kit somehow didn't have an EpiPen even though it was required. I was already running to my car while she talked. My hands fumbled with the keys as I calculated distances. The woods were 20 minutes away if I drove normally. I could make it in 12 if I broke every traffic law. Nomi's emergency EpiPen was in my glove compartment where I always kept a spare. Sydney kept the phone on speaker so I could hear what was happening. In the background, Nomi was crying and scratching at her skin. The sound made my foot press harder on the gas. I'd never heard her in that much pain before. Not when she broke her arm on the monkey bars. Not when she needed stitches after falling off her bike. I blew through a red light, narrowly missing a pickup truck. Sydney was describing Nomi's symptoms to the 911 operator on another phone. Hives spreading across her entire body. Swelling in her face and hands. The itching so bad she was drawing blood with her fingernails. 10 minutes to the woods parking lot. That's what my GPS showed as I swerved around slower cars. But I knew the trail to the meadow where they held the nature walks. Another 15-minute hike through rough terrain. 25 minutes total while my daughter's throat could be closing. Sydney's voice got more panicked. She says everything's getting blurry. She can't see right anymore. The mucus situation was getting worse too. Sydney tried to stay calm while describing how it was pouring from Nomi's nose faster than they could wipe it away. Like her body was trying to expel whatever poison she'd ingested through every possible route. The teacher was using up all their tissues and napkins. I took the exit for Riverside Woods at 60 miles per hour. The tires screamed as I barely made the turn. Behind me, I could hear sirens. Either someone had called in my reckless driving or they were heading to Nomi too. I prayed it was the second option. The parking lot appeared ahead. I skidded to a stop sideways across 2 spaces and jumped out with the EpiPen clutched in my sweaty hand. She's having trouble breathing now. It's getting worse. Sydney's voice through the phone sounded distant and tinny. I could hear Nomi wheezing in the background. The other kids were crying too, scared by watching their classmates struggle. The path split and I took the left fork toward the meadow. My shirt was soaked with sweat. A branch caught my face, leaving a stinging cut, but I didn't slow down. Each second Nomi couldn't breathe was potential brain damage. Through the trees, I finally saw them. A cluster of kids in bright field trip t-shirts surrounding something on the ground. I crashed through the underbrush yelling that I had the medicine. The circle parted, revealing Nomi. Her face was swollen beyond recognition. Eyes squeezed shut. Lips blue. The wheezing had stopped, which was worse than hearing it. Sydney was on her knees holding Nomi's hand while the teacher tried to keep her airways open. I dropped beside them and ripped the EpiPen from its case. Pulled off the safety cap. Jabbed it into Nomi's thigh through her jeans, holding for the full 10 seconds even though my hands were shaking. The click of the mechanism engaging was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Nomi gasped. A real breath. Then another. The blue faded from her lips as oxygen returned to her blood. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. The swelling would take longer to go down, but she was breathing. But we needed to find out what caused this. The paramedics had found another route. They burst through the trees with a stretcher and proper medical equipment. Started an IV, gave additional medications. Checked her vitals, which were stabilizing. As they loaded Nomi onto the stretcher, the paramedics started asking questions about what Nomi had eaten, going through her lunchbox. That's when Sydney froze mid-sentence. She pulled something from the bottom of Nomi's backpack, a sandwich bag with homemade cookies, the kind another parent might send for sharing. But these had a note attached in childish handwriting. For Nomi, from your secret admirer. Sydney looked at me with wide eyes as she read the ingredients listed below. Everything Nomi was deathly allergic to. Peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish extract. Like someone had specifically crafted a poison designed just for her. The paramedics were almost to the parking lot with Nomi. They didn't know about the note. Someone had tried to kill my daughter. I grabbed the paramedic's arm before he could close the ambulance doors and shoved the cookie bag with the note into his hands. My words came out in a rush about someone deliberately poisoning my daughter with her exact allergens while he stared at the ingredients list. His face changed completely when he saw peanuts, tree nuts, and shellfish extract all listed together. He radioed ahead to the hospital about potential criminal intent, while the other paramedic adjusted Nomi's IV drip. The ambulance pulled away with lights flashing, and I ran back to my car to follow them. Sydney was already gathering the other kids to get statements about who was near the backpacks. The drive to the hospital felt like hours, even though it was only 12 minutes. I kept checking my rearview mirror to make sure the ambulance was still ahead of me. At every red light, I wanted to run through it like I had on the way to the woods. The emergency room entrance was chaos when we arrived. I parked illegally in the patient loading zone and ran inside, clutching the evidence bag Sydney had given me with another cookie she'd found. The triage nurse barely looked up until I said someone had tried to murder my child with allergens. That got her attention fast. She picked up the red emergency phone and called security while pointing me toward the trauma bay where they'd taken Nomi. 2 security guards appeared within 30 seconds and started taking photos of the evidence bag. The medical team had Nomi hooked up to multiple monitors with oxygen flowing and IVs in both arms. Her face was still swollen, but the blue tint was gone from her lips. Sydney burst through the doors an hour later with her phone pressed to her ear. Principal Powell was on speaker asking rapid questions about the field trip supervision and which adults had been present. We sat in the corner making a list on Sydney's notepad of every parent, volunteer, teacher, and aide who'd been on the bus or at the lunch area. Sydney remembered 6 parent volunteers, including someone named Joanna, who'd brought homemade treats for the teachers. The list grew to 15 names when we added everyone who'd helped load backpacks onto the bus that morning. Powell kept asking about insurance coverage and whether proper protocols had been followed. The ER doctor came over holding Nomi's chart, and his expression was grim. He explained her anaphylaxis was one of the worst cases he'd seen in 15 years of emergency medicine. The combination of 3 major allergens had triggered a massive systemic reaction that required multiple doses of epinephrine to stabilize. Her throat had been 90% closed when the paramedics arrived. Another 2 minutes without treatment would have caused permanent brain damage or death. She'd need continuous monitoring for at least 24 hours as her body processed the allergen overload. Secondary reactions could still occur even with the medications. My phone rang showing the school's main number. Eric Powell's voice was different when I answered, more formal and careful, like he was reading from a script. He expressed deep concern for Nomi's well-being, then immediately shifted to explaining how the parent volunteers were responsible for supervision during field trips. The school's insurance would cover medical costs, but any questions about negligence would need to go through proper channels. His tone made my skin crawl as he talked about liability waivers we'd signed at the beginning of the year. I hung up on him mid-sentence. Sydney helped me photograph the cookie bag and note from every possible angle using both our phones. The childish handwriting was clear in each shot, showing the words, "For Nomi, from your secret admirer." We emailed the photos to ourselves with timestamps, and I uploaded them to 3 different cloud services. Sydney typed out the exact wording in a document and saved multiple copies. The ingredients list was photographed separately, showing each allergen clearly listed. That evening, a woman called identifying herself as Detective Mila Torres from the police department. She'd been assigned to investigate what she called an attempted poisoning case. Her voice sounded professional and thorough as she confirmed I'd preserved all the physical evidence without contaminating it. She scheduled an interview for the next morning and gave me her direct cell number in case anything urgent came up overnight. She asked me not to post anything on social media yet that might compromise the investigation. Bethany Jensen called from her home around 8 that night, sounding shaky and upset. She started listing every parent volunteer who'd been near the backpacks during the trail setup that morning. She specifically remembered seeing an extra brown bag near Nomi's backpack, but had assumed it was overflow from another kid's lunch. The parent volunteers had been moving around freely, helping kids organize their gear. Anyone could have slipped something into a backpack without being noticed. She gave me names and phone numbers for everyone she could remember being there. Later that night, I lay on the narrow bed next to Nomi's hospital bed, listening to the steady beep of her heart monitor. My mind kept replaying the desperate drive through town and the red light I'd blown through at the intersection of Main and 3rd. There was definitely a traffic camera there that would have caught my license plate. A ticket would arrive eventually, but it was the least of my worries now. Saving Nomi's life was worth any fine they wanted to throw at me. The next morning, the doctor came in with discharge papers and a detailed treatment plan. Nomi would need strict observation for 48 hours with someone awake and watching her at all times. He prescribed 6 different medications, including steroids, antihistamines, and emergency epinephrine auto-injectors. We'd need to see an allergist within the week for follow-up testing and documentation. He showed me how to recognize signs of secondary reactions, including rashes, breathing changes, or swelling. I took notes on my phone about every instruction, determined to control everything I possibly could to keep her safe. Sydney met me in the hospital cafeteria around noon, while the nurses checked Nomi's vitals upstairs. She grabbed my arm before I could even sit down and pulled me to a corner table away from other families. Her face was red and her hands shook as she pushed her phone across the table, showing me the class parent Facebook group. Parents were already posting questions about what happened on the field trip. I wanted to type out everything right then and warn every single parent that someone had tried to murder my daughter with poisoned cookies. Sydney grabbed the phone back and shoved it in her purse. She kept her voice low but firm as she explained how posting now would mess up any police investigation. The real killer could destroy evidence or create alibis if they knew we were onto them. My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. Every parent deserved to know their kids might be in danger. But Sydney kept insisting patience would help catch whoever did this. We went back and forth for 20 minutes with neither of us backing down. Finally, she pointed out that scaring the person might make them run or lawyer up before police could build a case. I hated it, but agreed to wait. That evening, Detective Torres arrived at the hospital wearing plain clothes and carrying an evidence kit. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and immediately got to work photographing the cookie bag from every angle. She put on latex gloves and carefully placed the bag and note into separate evidence bags, sealing each one and writing case numbers on the labels. Torres explained she couldn't let me contact any parents from the field trip yet since she needed to interview them without them comparing stories first. My jaw clenched, but I nodded. She gave me her business card with her cell number and promised to keep me updated. Around midnight, I dozed off in the chair next to Nomi's bed when I felt her hand squeeze mine. Her eyes were barely open and her lips were still swollen, but she was trying to talk. I leaned close to hear her whisper that she found the note taped to her backpack when they stopped for lunch at the picnic area. She remembered thinking it was weird because nobody at the school liked her that way. The words came out slow and painful through her swollen mouth. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to remember more, but started crying from the effort. I smoothed her hair and told her to rest. The next afternoon, we finally got discharged with a plastic bag full of medications. The nurse went through each bottle explaining dosages and schedules. Steroids twice a day. Antihistamines every 6 hours. Emergency EpiPens to keep within reach at all times. I took notes on my phone and set alarms for each medication time. Before leaving, I'd already texted Sydney a list of everything in our house that might trigger another reaction. She spent the morning throwing out anything with nuts, removing scented candles, switching to fragrance-free detergent, and vacuuming every surface twice. When we got home, she'd covered Nomi's bed with fresh hypoallergenic sheets and set up a baby monitor so I could watch her from anywhere in the house. That evening, my phone buzzed with an email from Principal Powell. The subject line said, "Important message regarding yesterday's field trip." His message was 3 paragraphs of corporate speak about a medical incident during the nature walk. He asked parents to avoid speculation while the school conducted its investigation. Not one word about the attempted murder or the missing EpiPen that should have been in the first aid kit. The last line made me want to throw my phone. We take all student safety concerns seriously and are reviewing our protocols. I forwarded it to Sydney with a message about how his lawyer must have written every word. She called immediately, agreeing it was pure damage control. After Nomi fell asleep, I opened my laptop and started making a spreadsheet. First column was everyone who knew about Nomi's allergies. The list grew fast. Her teacher, the school nurse, the principal, the office staff who had her medical forms, the cafeteria workers who had her allergy alert on file. Then I remembered her 504 accommodation plan that spelled out every single thing she couldn't eat. My fingers froze over the keyboard. That document listed peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, and 6 other allergens with detailed reaction descriptions. Anyone with access to student records would know exactly what could hurt her. The spreadsheet grew to 3 pages as I added parent volunteers, substitute teachers, and district staff. The next morning, I called the school demanding a meeting with Powell about who could access 504 plans. His secretary said he was completely booked but could maybe fit me in next week. I insisted it was urgent. She put me on hold for 5 minutes, then came back saying he'd be in district meetings for several days. I hung up and immediately drafted an email demanding the meeting within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Detective Torres was busy interviewing Bethany at the police station. Bethany texted me updates between sessions. They went through every minute of the field trip from when parents arrived to help set up until the ambulance left. Torres wanted names and phone numbers for every adult who'd been near the backpacks. She asked about the lunch schedule, who supervised the kids, and whether anyone seemed to be watching Nomi specifically. Bethany said she'd never seen cops take something this seriously with 2 detectives and a sergeant involved. That night, I couldn't help myself and checked the class Facebook group on my phone. The posts had multiplied into dozens of theories. Some parents thought it was a prank gone wrong. Others blamed the school for not having proper medical supplies. A few posted about food allergies being overblown these days. Then I saw a private message from a mom I barely knew named Jennifer. Her message was short but made my pulse race. "Call me about volunteer background checks. Not safe to post publicly." I saved her number to call in the morning. 2 days later, the allergist's office called saying they'd had a cancellation and could see us immediately. We drove straight there with Nomi still weak but walking on her own. The allergist ran new tests and confirmed what we already knew. Nomi's reactions were life-threatening and getting worse with each exposure. She wrote a 3-page letter to the school demanding better protocols and stating that the missing EpiPen could have been fatal. She was professional but clearly furious as she explained that anaphylaxis can kill in minutes. The letter spelled out exactly what the school needed to change, including locked medication storage, mandatory training, and backup EpiPens in every building. She made copies for us, the district, and her own files in case we needed expert testimony later. 3 days later, I finally got my meeting with Powell after threatening to show up at the district office with local news cameras. His office smelled like old coffee and printer toner as I sat across from his desk watching him shuffle papers to avoid eye contact. He kept repeating the same lines about privacy laws and ongoing investigations, while his hands moved nervously between his coffee mug and a stress ball shaped like the school mascot. I pushed harder, asking who had access to Nomi's medical records, but he just shook his head and suggested I wait for the police to finish their work. His assistant knocked and entered with more files, mentioning something about pulling security footage from last week before Powell cut her off with a sharp look. I made a mental note about those cameras as I left his office, more frustrated than when I'd arrived. Detective Torres called that afternoon with her own bad news about the footage I'd just learned existed. The school's hallway cameras fed into a district server that required approval from 3 different departments to access. She'd started the paperwork but warned it could take weeks to get through all the red tape. The detective sounded as annoyed as I felt, explaining how one department needed legal review, another required IT authorization, and the third had to verify chain of custody protocols. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop drafting a Freedom of Information Act request while Nomi slept upstairs. The template I found online helped me list exactly what I wanted, including all access logs for student medical records from the past 6 months. I added requests for staff training documentation about allergy management and any emails mentioning Nomi's accommodations. My fingers typed faster as I thought about Powell's stonewalling and added requests for security footage retention policies and camera placement maps. Sydney came over the next evening after I'd filed the FOIA request, and we got into our first real fight about my approach. She paced my living room, saying I was pushing too hard and might mess up the criminal case Torres was building. I argued back that waiting meant whoever did this could destroy evidence or hurt another kid. We went back and forth for an hour with voices raised until we both sat down exhausted and agreed we wanted the same thing, just through different methods. She hugged me before leaving and said she understood my need to do something even if she worried about the consequences. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the district about the missing EpiPen using their online portal. The automated response promised acknowledgement within 3 business days and resolution within 30. I printed everything, including screenshots of the submission confirmation, and filed it in the growing folder labeled with Nomi's name. Detective Torres called 2 days later, saying the crime lab had processed the cookie bag and note. She explained they'd found a partial print on the inside of the baggie, but it wasn't in any database, which meant no prior arrests. The handwriting on the note showed someone trying to disguise their normal style by using their non-dominant hand. She mentioned the baggie was a common brand sold everywhere, which would make tracking purchases nearly impossible. Kitchen gloves would have prevented most prints, and whoever did this had been careful, except for that one partial. That afternoon, a notification popped up on my phone from a parent I barely knew, asking to talk privately about something important. Her message said it was about the PTA president and how student information was handled, but she didn't want to put details in writing. We agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop 2 towns over where nobody from the school would see us. The woman arrived 10 minutes late, looking nervous and checking over her shoulder as she sat down. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos she'd taken at the last PTA meeting when someone left their laptop open. The screen showed a spreadsheet with every student's name, grade, teacher, and detailed allergy information in color-coded columns. She explained the PTA president kept this for event planning and shared it with any parent volunteer who asked. The document lived on a shared drive that at least 8 people could access without any password protection. She'd taken pictures of multiple screens showing how anyone could download or print the entire list. Detective Torres answered on the first ring when I called her from my car after the coffee shop meeting. She took down all the details about the unsecured allergy spreadsheet and said this gave her probable cause to expand her investigation. The baggie lead wasn't completely dead either, as she'd started requesting purchase records from stores with loyalty card programs. Every major grocery chain in town would have to provide data for anyone who bought that specific brand in the past month. She admitted it was a long shot since someone smart enough to plan this probably paid cash, but she had to check every angle. 2 hours later, I was back at the allergist's office for Nomi's follow-up appointment where they ran new blood tests. The doctor's face stayed serious as she reviewed the results showing antibody levels still dangerously high from the massive exposure. She wrote another letter to the school, this time copying the superintendent and school board about their privacy failures endangering student lives. Before we left, she pulled me aside and offered to testify as an expert witness if this went to trial, saying what happened to Nomi was attempted murder using weaponized medical information. I called Powell's office right after leaving the allergist, and his secretary said he could squeeze me in before lunch. The drive to the school took 10 minutes, and I parked in the visitor spot closest to the main entrance. Powell's office smelled like coffee, and the stress sweat that comes from avoiding lawsuits. He sat behind his desk shuffling papers while I stood there waiting for him to look up. After 30 seconds of this game, I pulled out a chair and sat down hard enough to make it squeak. He finally met my eyes and started talking about district policies and privacy concerns. I cut him off and asked who handled the snack coordination for the field trip. His face got red and he mumbled something about volunteers. I leaned forward and asked again, slower this time. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me, showing an email chain. The PTA had managed all the field trip food stuff, and they had the full allergy spreadsheet to plan safe snacks. 3 parent volunteers ran that whole system, and their names were right there in the email signatures. I took photos of everything with my phone while Powell looked like he wanted to throw up. Torres called me an hour later saying she was heading to interview the PTA president at her house. The next morning, Torres filled me in on what she'd learned. The PTA president had shown her the shared Google Drive where they kept all the student info. 8 different parents had editing access in the past month alone. Torres was making a chart of who accessed what files and when, cross-checking it with who was at the school during key times. The spreadsheet had 0 password protection, and anyone with the link could view it. I drove to the district office that afternoon to request the hallway security footage as a concerned parent. The woman at the front desk took my request form and disappeared into a back office for 15 minutes. She came back with a lawyer who explained that all footage was part of an active investigation and couldn't be released to anyone, not even parents. My friend who worked as a paralegal helped me rewrite my FOIA request that evening, making it more specific about what records I wanted. Torres showed up at my door 2 days later looking serious. She said my public records requests and the parent interviews I'd been doing were making too much noise. The district was complaining that I might mess up the investigation. She understood my need to find answers but asked me to step back and let her do her job. I agreed to stop the interviews but kept writing down everything I remembered in a notebook I hid in my bedroom closet. The forensics report arrived at the station 3 days after that. Torres called to tell me they'd found a partial fingerprint on the inside of the cookie bag, but it wasn't in any criminal database. There was also a weird smear pattern on the plastic that suggested someone had pulled off a glove too fast and left a mark. The print was good enough to match if they found a suspect, but useless for finding one. Torres spent the next week getting a judge to sign subpoenas for 3 different grocery stores. She wanted their loyalty card data for anyone who bought that specific brand of plastic bags and any nut flowers in the 2 weeks before the field trip. The legal paperwork moved slow, and each store's lawyers fought the subpoenas claiming customer privacy. The judge sided with Torres, but it still took forever to get the actual data. Sydney and I went to the emergency school safety meeting the district called for the following Tuesday night. The auditorium was packed with angry parents on both sides of the allergy debate. One dad stood up and said kids needed to toughen up and stop expecting the world to bubble wrap everything for them. A mom whose son had allergies started yelling back about life and death situations. The whole room exploded into shouting matches with people pointing fingers and calling each other helicopter parents or child endangerers. The principal had to call security to calm things down. The superintendent took the microphone and announced new policies before anyone could start arguing again. Every school building would get EpiPen stations in the nurse's office, main office, and cafeteria. All staff would have to complete quarterly training on recognizing and treating allergic reactions. The teachers' union rep stood up and said they'd been asking for this for 3 years after 2 previous close calls with other kids. The meeting ended with parents still grumbling but at least not screaming at each other. That week, Nomi started waking up screaming about food trying to hurt her. She wouldn't eat anything unless she watched me make it from ingredients she could see. Even sealed packages made her panic. I'd find her in the kitchen at 2 a.m. checking expiration dates on everything in the pantry. Her regular doctor said this was beyond normal recovery and gave us a referral to a child therapist who specialized in medical trauma. The therapist's first available appointment was 2 weeks out, but she put us on a cancellation list. Torres called on a Friday afternoon with her voice sounding different, excited but trying to stay professional. The loyalty card data had finally come through and showed something huge. A woman named Joanna Guthrie had bought almond flour, cashew flour, and the exact brand of sandwich bags 3 days before the field trip. She owned a small bakery downtown and had been listed as a parent volunteer for field trips all year. Torres was heading to interview her within the hour. The name hit me hard when Torres said it. Joanna Guthrie. I knew that name. My hands started shaking as the memory came flooding back. Last year at the September PTA meeting, I'd stood up and asked why the school kept hiring Joanna's catering company when she refused to make any allergy-safe options. She'd lost the contract after my complaint. Cost her thousands of dollars in steady income from the school events. The pieces clicked together in my brain so fast it made me dizzy. Joanna had been standing right there in the meeting room when I explained Nomi's specific allergies to the board. She'd heard me list every single thing that could kill my daughter. Peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, the exact ingredients in those cookies. I remembered her face getting redder as the PTA president agreed with my safety concerns. Her hands had been clenched into fists when they voted to find a new caterer. The way she'd looked at me when she stormed out of that meeting, pure hate in her eyes. At the time, I thought she was just mad about losing business. Now I realized it was so much worse than that. She'd been planning this, waiting for her chance, using her volunteer access to get close enough to hurt my child. My legs gave out and I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. Sydney found me there 20 minutes later when she came to check on us. I showed her Torres's text about Joanna and watched her face go pale. She remembered that PTA meeting too. Remembered how Joanna had stood up and said those exact words that were burned into my memory now. These allergy parents are destroying small businesses with their demands. Kids need to toughen up instead of expecting the world to cater to them. She'd said it looking straight at me, making sure I heard every word, making it personal. Torres called back 2 hours later with an update. She'd just finished interviewing Joanna at her bakery downtown. The woman denied everything and claimed she was targeted for standing up to helicopter parents. Said the whole thing was a witch hunt because she dared to question whether every kid really had allergies or if parents just wanted attention. Even with police questioning her about attempted murder, she couldn't hide her contempt. Torres said Joanna kept insisting allergies were fake and parents like me were ruining America. The detective's voice sounded tired as she explained they needed more evidence for an arrest. The loyalty card data showed purchases, but that wasn't enough. Lots of people bought those ingredients. They needed something linking her directly to the cookies in Nomi's backpack. That's when Torres mentioned she was getting a search warrant for Joanna's commercial kitchen. The judge signed it that afternoon based on the purchase records and Joanna's documented history with our family. Torres took a forensics team to the bakery the next morning while Joanna screamed about harassment and called her lawyer. They found nut residue all over the equipment even though Joanna claimed her kitchen was nut-free. The ingredient list on her prep counter matched the cookies exactly. Same brands of almond flour and cashew flour she'd bought 3 days before the field trip. Joanna kept saying she made lots of products for lots of customers, claimed the residue was from months ago, said anyone could have those ingredients. But Torres wasn't buying it. She bagged everything as evidence and sent it to the state lab for testing. The detective also took the note from the cookie bag to a handwriting analyst. Someone had found Joanna's kid's Instagram account where she posted pictures from the school craft projects. The analyst compared the writing on those projects to the note. There were similarities in how certain letters were formed, the way the lowercase a's had that little tail, how the capital F in for Nomi curved at the top. But handwriting analysis wasn't exact science. The expert could only say it was possible the same person wrote both. Not enough for court, but another piece of the puzzle. Torres kept digging, and that's when she found the email. 2 weeks before the field trip, Joanna had emailed the PTA president asking for the complete allergy list for all students. Claimed she wanted to develop what she called inclusive recipes that everyone could enjoy. The PTA president had sent her the spreadsheet thinking she was trying to help. Instead, she'd used it to craft the perfect weapon against my daughter. The premeditation was right there in black and white. She'd been planning this for 2 weeks, researching exactly what would hurt Nomi the most. Sydney came over that night and found me surrounded by printouts of everything Torres had shared. I'd been up for 36 hours straight researching Joanna's business, her social media, anything that could help the case. Sydney sat down across from me and said we needed to talk. She was worried about me. Said I was losing myself in anger instead of focusing on helping Nomi heal. We got into our worst fight ever right there in my living room. I kept saying Joanna needed to pay for what she did. Sydney kept saying Nomi needed her mom present and stable, not consumed by revenge. We were both crying and yelling. She was right, though. I was letting my rage take over everything, barely sleeping, not eating, spending every minute thinking about ways to make Joanna suffer. Meanwhile, Nomi was having nightmares and needed me to be there for her, not lost in my own anger. The next day, Torres called with news about the charges. District Attorney Silas Cobb was reviewing the case and trying to decide between attempted murder and reckless endangerment. The difference was huge. Attempted murder could mean decades in prison. Reckless endangerment might just be probation. Cobb said proving intent to kill versus intent to harm was the challenge. He needed more evidence that Joanna specifically wanted Nomi dead, rather than just sick. Torres was frustrated but said this was how the system worked. Meanwhile, the school district had started their own investigation. They placed both the nurse and Bethany under administrative review for the EpiPen failure. Bethany called me crying because she'd just been following the protocol she was taught. She thought the nurse always had the emergency supplies. Never knew she was supposed to check herself. The union lawyers got involved immediately. Said the district was scapegoating teachers for their own systemic failures. It was turning into a mess with everyone pointing fingers at everyone else. 3 days later, a traffic citation showed up in my mail. $450 for running the red light on my way to save Nomi. There was a photo from the traffic camera showing my car flying through the intersection. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. I actually laughed when I opened it. Gladly would have paid 10 times that amount. Running that light had saved precious minutes that kept my daughter alive. Worth every penny of the fine and then some. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in the therapist's office watching Nomi work with colored blocks on the floor. The therapist had been asking her about the field trip for 20 minutes when Nomi suddenly stopped moving the blocks and looked up. She remembered something important. The note with the cookies was already taped to her backpack when they got on the bus that morning. She'd seen it when she put her water bottle in the side pocket, but thought it was from me. The therapist wrote this down while I felt my stomach drop. This meant Joanna must have put it there during the morning chaos at the school when parents were dropping kids off for the field trip. The therapist asked more questions, and Nomi remembered seeing Joanna near the backpack area helping organize lunches. My hands were shaking as I texted this information to Detective Torres right there in the session. Torres called me back within an hour saying this was exactly what she needed. The timeline now showed clear premeditation and opportunity. She was getting an arrest warrant for Joanna that afternoon. I watched from my car across the street as 2 police cars pulled up to Joanna's house at dinner time. They knocked and waited while neighbors started coming out to watch. Joanna opened the door wearing an apron like she'd been cooking. The officers explained the charges while she stood there shaking her head. They turned her around and put handcuffs on her wrists right there on her porch. Her teenage son was filming everything on his phone from the doorway. The whole neighborhood was watching as they put her in the back of the patrol car. By morning, the arrest was all over our local Facebook groups. Some parents were calling her a monster who tried to murder a child. Others were saying it was probably an accident and everyone was overreacting about allergies like always. The comments got so nasty the moderators had to lock the threads. Joanna posted bail within 6 hours for $50,000. Her bakery stayed open the whole time with her employees running it. She hired Curtis Hodges, who was known for defending controversial cases. He immediately started posting on social media about cancel culture destroying small business owners. His press releases talked about helicopter parents who've lost perspective on childhood resilience. He said kids today are too sheltered and one mistake shouldn't ruin someone's life. Reading his statements made me physically sick. I had to close my laptop and walk away before I threw it against the wall. Sydney came over and found me pacing in the backyard trying to calm down. Meanwhile, Nomi's therapy sessions continued twice a week. The therapist started with breathing exercises to help with the panic attacks she'd been having. They practiced counting breaths and using a special stuffed animal that Nomi could squeeze when she felt scared. After 3 sessions, they moved on to food exposure. The therapist had Nomi look at pictures of different foods first. Then they brought sealed packages of safe foods into the room. Nomi would practice touching the packages while doing her breathing. One day, the therapist opened a package of plain crackers that were completely safe. Nomi's whole body was shaking as she watched. The therapist ate one first to show they were okay. Then she asked if Nomi wanted to try. It took 15 minutes of breathing exercises before Nomi could pick up the cracker. Her hand was trembling so hard she almost dropped it. She took the tiniest bite possible and started crying immediately. Not from pain, but from fear. I was watching through the window and had tears running down my face too. She was so brave trying to eat again after what happened. Each session got a little easier, but progress was slow. Some days she could eat a whole cracker. Other days she couldn't even look at food without panicking. The therapist said this was normal for trauma recovery. I started researching lawyers who specialized in suing school districts. Adriana Franco came highly recommended by 3 different parents who'd fought the district before. Her office was downtown in a building full of law firms. She listened to our whole story without interrupting once. Then she pulled out a legal pad and started writing. The district had multiple failures, she said. Missing EpiPen, privacy breach with the allergy list, inadequate supervision during the field trip, failure to train staff properly. She thought we had a strong case for negligence, but she warned that the district would fight hard to limit their liability. They had good lawyers and deep pockets from insurance. It could take years to resolve, and they'd try to blame everyone except themselves. She recommended starting with a demand letter outlining our claims and seeing if they'd settle. Detective Torres called the next week with frustrating news. The prosecutor was reviewing the case and leaning toward offering Joanna a plea deal. Attempted murder charges were nearly impossible to prove because they'd have to show she specifically intended to kill Nomi, not just harm her. The evidence showed premeditation, but not necessarily intent to kill. Reckless endangerment was easier to prove, and Joanna would probably take that deal. It might mean just probation instead of prison time. I was so angry I couldn't speak for a minute. Torres said she understood, but this was how the system worked. Prosecutors wanted guaranteed convictions, not risky trials. That weekend, Sydney came over to help me create safety plans for Nomi. We bought EpiPens in bulk and put them everywhere. 2 in the kitchen, 1 in each bedroom, 3 in my car, 2 in Sydney's car, 1 in my purse, 1 in Nomi's new backpack. We gave them to trusted neighbors and Nomi's best friend's parents. We practiced using trainer pens until Nomi could do it with her eyes closed. We made emergency cards with all her allergies and medications to give to any adult watching her. We rehearsed what to say if someone offered her food. We practiced calling 911 and explaining her condition. By Sunday night, Nomi could recite the entire protocol without hesitation. She knew exactly what to do if she felt symptoms starting. It helped her feel more in control. The pretrial conference happened 3 weeks later at the courthouse. I wasn't allowed in the room, but my victim advocate kept me updated by text. District Attorney Cobb was offering Joanna a plea to misdemeanor reckless endangerment. 2 years probation, no jail time, some community service. The advocate said Joanna's lawyer was pushing for even less. They went back and forth for 2 hours. Finally, they agreed on terms, but said my victim impact statement would influence the final sentence. I had 1 week to write it. I spent every night that week working on my statement. The first draft was 10 pages of pure rage about what Joanna did. Franco read it and said I needed to focus more on facts and impact, less on emotion. The second draft was better, but still too long. She helped me cut it down to 2 pages that hit all the key points. Nomi's ongoing trauma and therapy needs, the financial burden of medical bills and security measures, the broader danger Joanna posed to any child with allergies if she didn't face consequences, how her actions showed deliberate cruelty, not just negligence. The final draft was powerful, but controlled. The sentencing hearing was set for the following Monday. I barely slept the night before. Sydney stayed over to help with Nomi so I could focus. I practiced reading my statement out loud until I could do it without crying. Monday morning, we arrived at the courthouse early. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Joanna was already there with Curtis Hodges. She was wearing a conservative suit and looked smaller than I remembered. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. The judge entered and everyone stood. He reviewed the plea agreement first. Then he asked if I wanted to read my statement. I stood at the podium with shaking hands and read every word. I talked about Nomi's blue lips and the terror of not knowing if she'd survive. I described the nightmares and panic attacks and fear of eating. I explained how one person's deliberate cruelty had stolen my daughter's sense of safety. Joanna stared at the table the whole time. When I finished, The judge thanked me and asked Joanna if she wanted to speak. She stood and said she was sorry things got out of hand, but maintained she never meant for anyone to get hurt. The judge's face stayed neutral as he delivered his decision. He accepted the plea deal but added his own conditions. A restraining order keeping Joanna 500 feet away from Nomi at all times. 200 hours of community service specifically at allergy awareness organizations. A $10,000 donation to the Food Allergy Research Foundation. And mandatory completion of a food safety certification course. If she violated any terms, she'd serve 6 months in county jail. Joanna's lawyer started to object, but she grabbed his arm to stop him. The judge's additions would stand. 2 weeks after the hearing, the district sent out a mass email about their new safety rules. They were putting fingerprint scanners on all the doors where medical records were kept. Every building would have special locked boxes with EpiPens in the main office, cafeteria, gym, and playground. All teachers and staff had to do allergy training 4 times a year instead of just once. The email sounded like they were proud of these changes, but I kept thinking about how Nomi almost died before they cared. Franco called me the next morning about starting settlement talks with the district. She'd already sent them our demands for ongoing therapy costs, regular doctor visits to check Nomi's allergies, and the right to review their safety rules every 3 months. The district's lawyer offered $75,000 to make everything go away. Franco told them we weren't interested in just money. We wanted real support for Nomi's recovery. They went back and forth for days while I tried to focus on normal life. The traffic court date came up faster than expected. I stood in front of the judge holding the police report about my speeding that day. He read through my explanation about racing to save Nomi from the allergic reaction. The prosecutor wanted the full $450 fine plus points on my license. I explained how the school didn't have an EpiPen and the ambulance was stuck behind an accident. The judge looked at the hospital records showing when Nomi arrived and when I gave her the medicine. He knocked the fine down to $300 and made me take an online driving safety class but no points on my license. 4 months of therapy sessions passed before Nomi felt ready to go back to the school. The therapist helped her practice breathing exercises and worked through her fear of eating anything she didn't watch me make. We set up a plan where she'd only go for morning classes at first with an aide who carried 2 EpiPens and knew exactly what to do. That first day back, I sat in the parking lot for the whole 4 hours ready to run in if needed. When she came out at lunch with a huge smile from seeing her friends, I finally let myself breathe normally. The school announced they were hosting an allergy education night the following week. Our allergist agreed to lead it and explain how serious food allergies really were. I expected maybe 10 parents to show up, but the auditorium was half full. Parents who used to roll their eyes when I mentioned Nomi's allergies were asking real questions about cross-contamination and how to read labels. One dad even apologized for bringing peanut butter cookies to the bake sale last year without thinking. The whole mood in the community was shifting from seeing allergies as helicopter parent nonsense to understanding they were real medical conditions. Franco finally got the district to agree on settlement terms after 3 months of negotiations. They'd pay $50,000 plus cover Nomi's therapy for the next 10 years. We also got quarterly meetings where we could review and suggest changes to their allergy rules. Most importantly, Franco made sure we could still talk publicly about what happened instead of signing some silence agreement. The check would help with medical bills, but the ongoing support mattered more. 6 months after that terrible day in the woods, one of Nomi's classmates had a birthday party at the park. I watched from a picnic table 20 feet away as she played tag and laughed with her friends. Her emergency medicine stayed in my pocket where I could reach it in seconds. She looked so normal and happy, but I knew the fear would never completely leave either of us. Seeing her run around without that haunted look in her eyes reminded me why we fought so hard. She'd won back her childhood even if we couldn't forget what almost got stolen from her. The district asked me to join their new parent safety committee after everything settled. We met once a month to write better rules for handling medical emergencies and keeping student health information secure. Other districts started asking for copies of what we created. Within a year, our protocols became the model for the whole state's education department. What Joanna tried to do to my daughter ended up protecting thousands of kids with allergies across the state. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the biggest changes. Thanks for hanging in there with me through all the questioning and wondering. Really enjoyed exploring these moments right alongside you all. Subscribe for more content like this.